Welcome to Revenge Stories, where justice finds its voice. Hey there, friend. Ever been betrayed? Lied to? Felt the sting of someone walking away when you needed them most? You're not alone. Here, we share the most jaw-dropping revenge stories from cheaters getting what they deserve to manipulative families falling apart. Every twist will keep you on edge, and every moment of justice will leave you satisfied. So grab your headphones, sit back, and let these stories pull you in. Because sometimes the best endings are the ones they never saw coming. Follow now and don't miss a single moment of payback. I never thought I'd know the taste of betrayal so intimately. Not until that scorching afternoon at a lonely gas station in the middle of nowhere, when the man I had once trusted with my heart and my future abandoned me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. James Wilson, my husband of 3 years, the father of the child growing inside me, sat in the driver's seat of our luxury SUV, laughing. His family, his mother, Diana, and his sister, Ashley, joined in, their cruel amusement echoing across the empty station. The sun was merciless, searing my skin as I stepped out of the restroom and saw them staring at me through the car's windows, their faces twisted in mockery. And then, before I could reach them, the SUV jerked forward. I ran. I shouldn't have. I was 8 months pregnant. Every movement slow and heavy, but I ran, waving my arms, screaming his name. James didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. He just kept driving, his family still chuckling at my desperation. My breath hitched, and I stumbled to a stop, one hand cradling my swollen belly, the other covering my mouth as a sob choked its way out. They were gone. I was alone. The gas station was barely more than a shack, an old faded sign swaying above the rusted fuel pumps. There was no one around except for the owner, an elderly man with sun-worn skin, and his wife, a woman with soft eyes who looked at me like she already knew. Maybe she did. Maybe they'd seen cruelty like this before. The man, Tom, stepped forward first, offering a hand that I couldn't take because mine were shaking too much. "Come inside," he said gruffly, his voice thick with quiet anger. "We'll get you some water." I let him lead me into the tiny air-conditioned shop. His wife, Barbara, rushed to bring me a chair, fussing over me like I was one of her own. "How could he do that to you?" she murmured, pressing a cold bottle of water into my trembling fingers. I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did. Maybe I had known this was coming and had chosen to ignore it. James hadn't been the same since I told him I was pregnant. At first, it was subtle missed calls, late nights at work, distant eyes when I talked about baby names. Then came the sharp remarks. The way he started agreeing with his mother's cruel observations about me. The way he let his sister laugh at me, like I was some kind of pathetic charity case. I had married into money, but I had never wanted it. I was a kindergarten teacher, a woman who had built her life around patience and kindness. I had thought love was enough. James had proved me wrong. My stomach twisted violently, and I clutched the bottle tighter, trying to breathe through the wave of nausea and shock. "He took everything," I whispered. "My phone, my purse, my hospital bag. He left me with nothing." Tom's jaw tightened. He exchanged a look with his wife before turning back to me. "Not nothing," he said firmly. "You've got witnesses." Barbara nodded, already pulling a phone out of her apron pocket. "We're calling the news." I should have stopped her, should have begged her not to. But something inside me, something raw and seething, held me still. I wanted them to know. I wanted the world to see the man who had done this. James Wilson, the golden boy of Florida Values Insurance, the devoted son of Diana Wilson, the self-proclaimed champion of family values, the smug brother of Ashley Wilson, who had once accidentally spilled red wine all over my baby shower dress, and then laughed it off. I could already imagine what they were saying about me now. That I had overreacted, that I had embarrassed myself, that I wasn't fit to be a Wilson. Barbara's voice was firm as she spoke to the local news station. "Yes, a pregnant woman, abandoned at a gas station. No phone, no money. Yes, we have security footage." My head snapped up. "Footage?" Tom gestured to a small monitor behind the counter. "Cameras picked up everything." He turned the screen toward me, and there I was stepping out of the restroom, confusion turning to horror as I watched my own husband drive away. And then, the audio clear as day. Take a nice walk. James's voice, light, almost playful. The laughter that followed was like a knife to my gut. Something inside me, something deep and buried under years of love and disappointment, snapped. Send it to them, I said, my voice eerily calm. Send it to everyone. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. James had taken everything from me, but he had no idea what I was about to take from him. The news spread faster than I expected. By the time I had calmed enough to drink the water, Barbara had handed me. My story was already making waves. A local news crew was on their way. Tom had sent the security footage to every major station in the area. And I? I sat there, stunned, my hands trembling against my belly as my baby shifted inside me, as if she, too, could feel the tension boiling beneath my skin. Sweetheart, you need to breathe, Barbara said softly, her warm hands pressing against my shoulders. Breathe? How was I supposed to breathe when my own husband had discarded me like trash? When his family had laughed as they left me stranded with nothing but the dress on my back and a belly full of child? When even now, they were likely lounging by some sparkling resort pool, sipping cocktails and celebrating their cruelty? Tom cleared his throat. You should see this. He turned his monitor toward me. It was James's social media, a freshly posted picture of him and his family at the resort, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his face, a tropical drink in his hand. His caption was a knife straight to my gut, finally free for a real vacation. Nothing like family time without the unnecessary baggage. Hashtag beach life, hashtag family first baggage. That's what I was to him, what our unborn child was. The room spun. My breath came out in short, ragged bursts, a trembling rage building deep in my bones. Barbara's hands tightened on my shoulders, as if she feared I might collapse. Oh, honey, she whispered. I barely heard her over the roaring in my ears. The post already had hundreds of likes, comments full of laughter, congratulations, inside jokes from their rich, entitled friends. Finally, you deserve this break, man. Hope she doesn't come running after you. Lolo knew she wouldn't last as a Wilson. Enjoy your freedom. I felt sick. These people, the ones who had smiled at me at galas, who had toasted at my wedding, who had fawned over my pregnancy just months ago, had always been waiting for this moment. They had never seen me as one of them. They had been waiting for James to cast me aside like I was nothing. Barbara snatched the mouse from Tom's hand and scrolled further down James's page. His mother's foundation just announced some fundraiser for family values and responsibility next week. Tom scoffed. Unbelievable! The hypocrisy was suffocating. Diana Wilson, the esteemed matriarch, the so-called champion of family values, had just left her pregnant daughter-in-law to rot at a gas station, and now she was planning an event to celebrate the very concept she had mocked. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. Not this time, I murmured. Barbara gave me a knowing look. What are you thinking, sweetheart? I exhaled shakily. That fundraiser? I lifted my chin, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'll be there. Before Barbara or Tom could respond, a knock at the gas station's door startled us. The news crew had arrived. A woman in a navy blazer stepped inside, microphone in hand, her cameraman adjusting the lens behind her. She took one look at me disheveled, pregnant, abandoned, and her expression softened, though her eyes gleamed with the promise of a story. Kayla Thompson? Her voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of urgency. I'm Jennifer Parker with Channel 7 News. Would you be willing to share your story? I straightened in my chair, pressing a hand protectively over my belly. This was it. My chance to make sure no one ever forgot what James Wilson had done, to make sure he and his family felt the weight of what they had dismissed as a joke. I nodded once, turned the camera on. The interview was raw, unfiltered. I told them everything from the moment I stepped out of that restroom to the cruel laughter that followed as my husband drove away. I described the heat, the fear, the sick realization that I had no way to call for help. I told them about the security footage, about James's social media post, about Diana Wilson's upcoming event and the hypocrisy of it all. Jennifer's eyes burned with indignation. And what would you say to your husband and his family if they were watching this right now? I turned directly to the camera, my voice steadier than it had been all day. You called me baggage. You left me stranded with nothing. You laughed. But I promise you this, I am not done. The moment the interview aired, the internet erupted. Within hours, the video was shared across every major platform. The security footage played on repeat, James's voice mocking me, his family's laughter ringing out like a death knell to their spotless reputations. Hashtags trended nationwide. Hashtag Justice for Kayla. Wilson family scandal. Hashtag Family First Mayaz. By morning, it was on national news. James's company, Florida Values Insurance, was flooded with backlash. Clients pulled policies. Investors demanded answers. Diana's Foundation's fundraiser was officially boycotted. Ashley Wilson's name was dragged through the mud as screenshots of her past social media posts surfaced jokes about gold-digging wives and keeping bloodlines pure. And James? James had gone silent. I wasn't surprised. I knew him well enough to know that the moment things got hard, he retreated. That had always been his way avoiding responsibility, hiding behind his mother's money and his father's name. But he couldn't hide from this, and I wasn't finished. Because while the world was just now learning about his cruelty, I had already seen the worst of it. And soon they would too. This was just the beginning. I thought I had seen the worst of it. I thought James and his family abandoning me at that gas station was the ultimate betrayal. But I was wrong. So very, very wrong. It was the day after my story went viral. My phone was constantly buzzing. Messages flooding in from strangers, supporters, journalists, some offering help, others demanding more details, and of course, the occasional threats from the Wilson family's dwindling circle of supporters. I ignored most of them, focusing only on what mattered, the truth. Tom and Barbara had insisted I stay with them, refusing to let me spend the night alone. I didn't argue. My body was exhausted, my mind frayed, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their laughter, saw James's face as he drove away, felt the suffocating heat of that lonely gas station. Morning came with another media storm, but before I could process the latest headlines, Tom appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Kayla," he said quietly, "I need to show you something." He led me to the small back office where the security footage had first revealed my husband's betrayal. But this time, the screen wasn't paused on James's car pulling away. No, this was different. Tom clicked play. The footage was from earlier that day, before I had walked out of the restroom. James and his family were still in the car, parked just outside the gas station. The engine was running. The air conditioning was on. They were waiting. And then I heard it, Diana's voice. Cold, calculated. "This will teach her to embarrass our family," Ashley snorted. "She's too stupid to even see it coming." James laughed, low and mocking. "She'll be fine. She always makes it out okay. If she doesn't, well, one less problem to deal with." I clutched the desk for support, my breath catching in my throat. Barbara whispered a curse under her breath. Tom just shook his head. But the video wasn't over. James's voice again, this time quieter, more serious. "Mom, what about?" Diana cut him off. "It's all taken care of. She has nothing. No phone, no money. She won't be able to do anything until we're long gone." Ashley snickered. "And by the time she figures anything out, it'll be too late." I tasted bile. My vision blurred. This wasn't just cruelty. This wasn't just abandonment. They had planned this. Deliberately. Carefully. The first pressed a hand to my belly, as if I could shield my daughter from the sheer malice radiating from that screen. "Those bastards," Barbara hissed. Tom exhaled sharply. "That's not all." I turned to him, barely able to focus. What else could there possibly be? He hesitated before opening an email on his computer. "A friend of mine works security at the resort, where James and his family are staying. He saw your story and decided to do a little digging." He clicked on an attachment. An email thread popped up. The subject line? "Custody preparation urgent." I scanned the emails, my heart pounding. James had been in contact with a lawyer. Months ago. Before he left me. Before the gas station. Before everything. He was planning to take my baby. The emails detailed a strategy. After I gave birth, James and his family would move to file for emergency custody, using my emotional instability as grounds to claim I was unfit. Diana had even outlined a media strategy, how they would paint me as erratic, irresponsible, and, if necessary, financially incompetent. They had connections, judges, lawyers, PR teams. They had been waiting for the right moment. My hands shook. They never intended for me to be a part of my daughter's life. I didn't realize I was crying until Barbara wrapped her arms around me. Oh, sweetheart. Rage burned through my veins, hotter than anything I had ever felt. I had been so focused on their cruelty that I had missed the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me. It was about my daughter, my family, and they had been planning to rip her away from me before she was even born. No, no. I wiped my tears away, my fingers tightening into fists. They thought they could control this narrative. They thought they could destroy me. They thought wrong. I turned to Tom, my voice ice cold. Send this to the press. His eyes widened. Kayla, are you sure? I'm sure, I said, standing taller than I had in days. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. But they underestimated me. Barbara smiled through her own tears. Damn right they did. Tom nodded, clicking the button. Consider it done. It only took an hour before the headlines changed. Wilson family exposed. Planned to steal child from pregnant wife. James Wilson's darkest secret custody. Scam unveiled. Emails reveal Wilson's plot to declare wife unfit before child is even born. Social media erupted. News anchors looked horrified as they read the details aloud. Legal experts weighed in, discussing the repercussions. Activists began rallying around my case. And James? James was silent. Not for long, because now the world knew the truth, and I was just getting started. They thought they had power. They thought their wealth, their influence, their carefully curated public image would protect them. But they had underestimated one thing: me. The world now knew the truth, and the Wilson family was crumbling under the weight of their own deception. The emails were damning, undeniable. Every major news network dissected the leaked documents, breaking down how James and his family had plotted to strip me of my baby before she was even born. Diana Wilson's carefully cultivated reputation as a philanthropist and champion of family values disintegrated overnight. The hypocrisy was too blatant, too grotesque to be ignored. And the public? They were ruthless. Social media was ablaze, hashtags calling for justice, for investigations, for criminal charges trended for days. Major sponsors began pulling their support from Diana's foundation, distancing themselves from the scandal. The prestigious country clubs and elite social circles that had once fawned over the Wilsons now treated them like lepers. I watched it unfold from Tom and Barbara's small living room, my hands clenched into fists as one news anchor after another condemned them. Then came the footage clips of Diana being cornered by reporters outside her mansion, her carefully Botoxed face frozen in barely restrained rage as microphones were shoved toward her. Miss S. Wilson, do you have any response to the leaked emails? Did you and your son attempt to steal custody of Kayla Thompson's child? Do you have anything to say to the countless women now coming forward about your foundation's history of manipulating struggling mothers? Diana ignored them at first, sweeping past them in a designer suit and oversized sunglasses, but it was clear she was unraveling. Then, a leaked video surfaced an internal meeting at the foundation where she snapped at her staff, screaming that they had failed to contain the PR disaster. This little bitch should have been dealt with before it got this far, she screeched. How hard is it to discredit a kindergarten teacher? That was the final nail in the coffin. The board of her own foundation turned against her, issuing a statement condemning her actions and cutting all ties. The IRS began an investigation into the foundation's finances, uncovering years of tax fraud and embezzlement. Within a week, the Wilson Family Foundation, a dynasty built on lies, collapsed. But that was just the beginning. James was next. His company, Florida Values Insurance, had tried to remain silent at first, hoping the scandal would die down. It didn't. Their name became synonymous with corruption and deception, and soon, clients were canceling policies en masse. Then, a former employee came forward, James's ex-assistant. She revealed emails detailing how James had used company funds to finance private investigations into my personal life, attempting to dig up anything that could be used against me in a custody battle. He had even attempted to bribe a doctor to falsely declare me mentally unfit. Florida Values Insurance had no choice. They fired James publicly, releasing a statement condemning his actions. His career was over, and I wasn't done. Ashley Wilson, the arrogant socialite who had delighted in humiliating me, found herself under fire next. Screenshots of her past comments surfaced, racist, elitist remarks she had made in private group chats, mocking lower income families and calling single mothers parasites. The brands she worked with, the sponsors of her lavish influencer lifestyle, severed ties with her overnight. Her carefully curated image shattered, and with it, her income. The Wilson family was drowning, and for the first time, no one was throwing them a lifeline. Then came the lawsuit. With the evidence stacked against them, my lawyers filed an official case. James had not only attempted to abandon me, but had conspired to take my child. That alone was grounds for legal action. But then came the insurance fraud, the forged documents, the attempt to coerce legal professionals into falsifying records. Every single crime they had committed in their arrogance was now being scrutinized under the cold, unrelenting light of the law. James tried to reach out to me, a desperate voicemail, his voice stripped of all confidence, all superiority. "Kayla, please, we need to talk. You have no idea what you've done. You're ruining everything." I played it twice, just to hear the raw panic in his voice, before deleting it without a second thought. The trial was fast-tracked due to public pressure. The evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the leaked security footage, the testimony of former employees and acquaintances who no longer had anything to gain by protecting them. I sat in the courtroom, my hands resting over my belly as I watched James squirm in his seat, his once perfectly tailored suit looking suffocatingly tight. Diana sat beside him, her sharp features drawn in fury, while Ashley glared daggers at me from across the room. They had always viewed me as weak. They had thought I would crumble under their cruelty. They had forgotten one simple truth. A mother will do anything to protect her child. And I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my daughter. The judge's gavel echoed through the room as he delivered the verdict. James Wilson guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and endangerment. Diana Wilson guilty of fraud and conspiracy. Ashley Wilson found liable in the civil case and ordered to pay damages. The Wilson empire, once untouchable, was no more. As James was led away in handcuffs, he turned, his eyes desperate. "Kayla, please! You can't do this to me!" I met his gaze, my voice calm, unwavering. "You did this to yourself." And with that, I turned away, because this was over, and I had won. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the real reckoning began. I had watched James, Diana, and Ashley squirm under the weight of their verdicts, their empire of lies crumbling before my eyes. But I wasn't done yet, because while they had been publicly disgraced, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their future, there was one thing left to ensure justice. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the judge prepared to issue the sentencing. The prosecution had been relentless, presenting every piece of evidence with surgical precision. The conspiracy to abandon me, the plotted custody battle, the insurance fraud, it was all laid bare. Their crimes weren't just cruel, they were criminal. James sat hunched over, his once perfect posture reduced to that of a broken man. His suit, once pristine and fitted, now looked like a desperate attempt to cling to an image long since shattered. Diana's hands were clenched into fists, her carefully composed facade cracking with each passing second. Ashley glared daggers at me, but I didn't even bother acknowledging her. They had spent their entire lives controlling people, manipulating, discarding, and silencing those who didn't fit into their world. But today, the law spoke louder than their money ever could. The judge's voice was firm, unwavering. James Wilson, for conspiracy to commit fraud, child endangerment, and unlawful abandonment, this court sentences you to 8 years in state prison. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs. The press, packed in the back, scrambled to capture every reaction. James reeled back, his face going deathly pale as his mouth opened in silent protest. 8 years. 8 years to sit behind bars and think about how he had tried to destroy me. 8 years to reflect on every smug smile, every cruel laugh, every lie he had ever told. Diana's nails dug into the wooden table before her. Your Honor, this is a mistake. Silence, Miss S. Wilson, the judge snapped, or I will hold you in contempt. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing further. Her power, her influence meant nothing here. Not anymore. The judge turned to her next. Diana Wilson, for orchestrating fraud, conspiracy to commit perjury, and financial misconduct, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. She swayed in her seat, the weight of reality finally setting in. The once untouchable matriarch of the Wilson family, now just another criminal waiting to be taken away. Ashley's name was next. My breath caught, waiting for the final piece to fall into place. Ashley Wilson, for your role in conspiracy, defamation, and obstruction of justice, you are sentenced to 2 years probation and financial restitution of $500,000 to the plaintiff. Ashley shot up from her seat. Probation? That's bullshit. The gavel slammed down. Sit. Down. She did, but barely. She looked at me then, her expression venomous. If she thought I'd react, she was sorely mistaken. She wasn't even worth my attention. The moment the sentencing was finalized, the guards moved in. I watched as James was pulled to his feet, his hands trembling. The same hands that had once held mine, the same hands that had touched my belly and promised me a future, now locked in handcuffs. He turned to me, desperate, pathetic. Kayla, please, he rasped. You've made your point. We don't have to do this. I stood, leveling my gaze at him. You did this to yourself, James. Just like you did everything else. His jaw tightened, but there was no fight left in him. The guards led him away, and Diana followed, her head held high in one last desperate attempt to salvage dignity that no longer existed. Ashley refused to look at me as she stormed out, flanked by her lawyers, her future reduced to nothing but legal battles and financial ruin. The moment they were gone, a wave of something unfamiliar crashed over me. Relief. Not just because I had won, not just because they had lost, but because I was free, truly, finally free. I stepped outside, the crisp air filling my lungs. The press swarmed, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, but I ignored them all. My fight wasn't with them. Nicole was waiting by my car, her face breaking into a wide smile as she rushed forward to hug me. You did it, I exhaled, my grip on her tightening. We did. Barbara and Tom were there too, their faces beaming with pride. Tom gave me a firm nod, his voice rough with emotion. Your daughter's gonna grow up, knowing how strong her mother is. My hands instinctively went to my belly. My daughter. She would never know the cruelty of the Wilsons. She would never grow up under the shadow of their manipulation. She would be safe, loved, protected. And as I looked around at the people who had stood by me, fought for me, I realized something else. I had lost a husband, but I had gained something far more precious. A family that truly cared. The Wilsons had spent their lives crushing people beneath their feet, using power and money as weapons. But in the end, it hadn't saved them. Justice had. And that, I thought as I walked away from the courthouse, was the greatest victory of all. The world didn't forget what the Wilsons had done. Their fall from grace wasn't just a public spectacle. It became a symbol of something much bigger. The trial had exposed more than just their personal cruelty. It had unearthed a system that allowed people like them to thrive for far too long. And the world wasn't willing to let that stand anymore. I watched from the sidelines as the aftermath unfolded, each consequence landing like another nail in the coffin of the Wilson legacy. James Wilson was no longer a name associated with wealth and prestige. It was a cautionary tale, a corporate disgrace. The moment his sentence was announced, Florida Values Insurance cut all ties with him, releasing a public statement condemning his actions. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized. Every former ally, every so-called friend who had once flattered him, abandoned him like a sinking ship. It turned out, People didn't admire cruelty as much as he thought they did. His prison sentence wasn't just time behind bars, it was the loss of everything he had built his ego around. For the first time in his life, James had no power, no control, and no way out. Diana Wilson, once the queen of high society, now found herself stripped of her status. Her foundation, the one she had spent decades using as a front for her influence, had crumbled under the weight of its exposed corruption. The IRS continued digging, uncovering layers of fraud that ensured her financial ruin long before her 5-year prison sentence was up. The country clubs, the charity galas, the political circles, none of them wanted to be associated with her now. The woman who had spent her life molding the Wilson name into something untouchable was now a pariah. Her empire had burned to the ground, and for the first time, she had no one left to manipulate into saving her. Ashley fared no better. Her probation meant she didn't share a cell with her brother and mother, but her punishment came in other ways. The brands that once paid her to flaunt her wealth and privilege cut ties overnight. The socialite status she had built her entire identity on vanished, and without the family money to support her, she was forced to face a reality she had never prepared for, one where she had to survive without her name doing the work for her. I didn't care enough to find out how she was dealing with it. She had made her choices. Now she was just another nobody in a world that had moved on. But it wasn't just them. Their stories sent shockwaves through the system they had once thrived in. Investigations into other families like the Wilsons began popping up. Foundations that had operated with similar hidden agendas were suddenly under scrutiny. Laws were being reevaluated. People, especially women, started speaking out about their own experiences with financial abuse, coercion, and systemic manipulation. And through it all, my name became something I never expected, a voice for change. It started small interviews, panel discussions, conversations with activists who had been fighting battles like mine long before my story went public. But then, something bigger happened. The Thompson Protection Act. I hadn't expected it, hadn't even known it was in the works until a journalist reached out for a statement. A group of lawmakers had used my case as the foundation for a new bill, one that would make it a felony to abandon a pregnant spouse in a way that endangered their life. It included harsher penalties for financial abuse in custody cases, protections against fraudulent legal maneuvers like the ones James had attempted to use against me. I sat in my small living room, watching as the bill passed, my hands resting on my swollen belly. My daughter wasn't even born yet, but she had already changed the world, and so had I. As for me, I rebuilt. The settlement money from the civil case against Ashley helped me secure a home, a small, quiet place where I could raise my daughter in peace. Florida Values Insurance, desperate to repair their image after James's downfall, offered me a job as a consultant for their new ethics division. I took it not because I wanted to help them, but because I wanted to make sure no other woman went through what I did under their policies. And I kept teaching, because that was who I was. Long before James, long before the Wilson name tried to erase me. Nicole became my daughter's godmother. Tom and Barbara visited often, always bringing small gifts and reminders that I had gained more than I had lost. The Wilsons had tried to break me, but in the end, they had only freed me. The day I finally gave birth, I held my daughter close, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine. Lily, strong, resilient, a name that meant rebirth. She would never know the cruelty of the family that had tried to claim her before she was even born. She would grow up knowing love, safety, and the kind of strength that didn't come from power or wealth, but from standing back up even when the world tried to knock you down. Months later, I sat down for one last interview, the one I knew would close this chapter of my life for good. The reporter leaned forward. If you had one message for James and his family, what would it be? I smiled, not out of spite, but out of the quiet certainty that they had lost. I'd say thank you. The reporter blinked, surprised. Thank you? For what? For underestimating me. Because in the end, their greatest mistake wasn't just abandoning me. It was believing I wouldn't rise from the ashes they left me in. And I had, stronger than ever. I used to believe that survival meant staying quiet, enduring cruelty with grace, swallowing pain so it wouldn't consume me. I don't believe that anymore. Survival isn't about enduring, it's about rising. The sun was setting as I stood on the small balcony of my home, cradling Lily in my arms. The warm breeze carried the scent of the sea, a gentle reminder that life kept moving forward. My daughter slept peacefully, her tiny fingers curled against my skin, unaware of the storm she had been born into and the fire that had forged the woman holding her. I glanced at my phone, where an alert flashed across the screen. James Wilson denied parole. I exhaled, slowly, letting the weight of those words settle. He had tried to appeal his sentence, claiming he had learned his lesson, that prison had changed him, but the judge had seen through him, just as I had. James was still the same man who had left me stranded, who had plotted to take my child, who had believed that power made him untouchable. He wasn't untouchable anymore. Neither was Diana. Her time behind bars had aged her, the arrogance stripped away with each passing day. Her former allies had long since abandoned her, the empire she built reduced to dust. Ashley, too, had disappeared from the public eye. Her attempts at rebranding herself met with scorn. No one wanted to be associated with the Wilson name anymore. But I had rebuilt. Not into the woman I was before, but into someone stronger, someone who no longer feared the fire because she had become it. My story had sparked something bigger than revenge. Laws had changed, conversations had started, and women who had once suffered in silence were now standing up for themselves. I had become a voice for them not because I sought the spotlight, but because I refused to let my pain be wasted. And yet, my greatest victory wasn't found in the headlines or the court rulings. It was here, in this quiet moment, in the weight of my daughter against my chest, in the knowledge that she would grow up without fear, without doubt, without the shadow of the Wilsons looming over her. She would know her mother as strong, as free. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Nicole stood there holding 2 cups of coffee, a smirk on her face. I figured you could use this. You looked way too serious up there. I laughed softly, stepping aside to let her in. Just thinking. About James? About everything. Nicole handed me the coffee and settled onto the couch, watching as I rocked Lily gently. You know, most people would have crumbled after everything you went through. I met her gaze. I did crumble. But then I built myself back up. Her smile widened. Stronger than before. I nodded, sipping the warm coffee, feeling the truth settle deep in my bones. Yes, stronger, unbreakable. A phoenix reborn from the ashes of a life that was never meant to hold me down. The Wilsons had tried to destroy me. They had burned everything I had known to the ground. But I had walked through the flames and emerged whole. And as I looked at my daughter, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.